On the front lines, every decision matters. That's why Intel partnered with EdgeRunner AI to bring AI where and when our troops need it most. In the field, in real time. EdgeRunner's secure, domain-specific language model is optimized to run on Intel-powered devices, and it's built on Intel's 50-year commitment to advanced manufacturing right here on American soil. That's the power of Intel Inside. See what we can build together at intel.com/USAI.
I'm Ben Watson, and welcome to Defense One Radio. On Friday, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration has authorized using the U.S. military to attack drug cartels operating around Latin America. One of those, whose name translates to Cartel of the Suns, is allegedly headed by President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, according to the Trump administration. Now, to lay out the general picture here, we heard a lot of dramatic ideas during Trump's campaign, including that migrants were eating cats and dogs, which was not true. But we also heard a lot of ideas that had been stewing for some time among the sort of militant, reactionary wing of the Republican Party, and Trump latched on to nearly all of those ideas in the run-up to his election win last November. His strongest issue among voters has been his tough stance on immigration. One of the ideas he flagged in all three of his campaigns was deploying the military along the U.S.-Mexico border to try to help stop the flow of drugs and people. Well, since taking office in January, he's done that, and he's gradually expanded on it, widening specially protected U.S. military territory from Texas to California. He also vowed to use the military to help deport migrants, and officials have begun doing that in Los Angeles and Florida. He also said he wanted to use the military to attack drug cartels as if they were terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Back in January, the Trump administration ordered the State Department to label drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which seemed to pave the way for future military operations. And that brings us to August, because just last Thursday, both the Justice and State Departments announced a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Venezuela's President Maduro on drug trafficking charges. The Times report on Trump ordering the military against cartels came out the very next day. Well, it's worth noting that back in 1989, President Bush ordered more than 20,000 troops into Panama to arrest its leader, Manuel Noriega, who, like Maduro today, had been indicted in the U.S. on drug trafficking charges. That one was named Operation Just Cause by its American planners. Could we have another Noriega-like episode on our hands soon? Kevin Maurer is a longtime writer and reporter who focuses on U.S. Special Operations Forces around the world. Last month, he wrote about the CIA's secret Afghan army for Rolling Stone, and we've had him on the program a couple of times before, but I called him up today to discuss something he wrote for the magazine back in January. It's entitled, "Here's What Trump's Mexico Invasion Plan Could Look Like." Now, when I heard about the Times report on August 8th, I thought about Maurer's reporting and thought I'd ask him what he's learned or heard about all of it since Trump took office 6 months ago. So, Kevin Maurer, welcome back to Defense One Radio.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, I appreciate you staying on this beat. You've had a couple of things that you've written about that I really enjoyed. I was reading about that secret Afghan army piece, touching difficult stuff at times. I think we've got maybe a prosecution still underway in that case. But a year ago, Trump told voters that he wanted to use the military against cartels. He got reelected, and he's apparently greenlit at least some of those related operations we learned on Friday. Looking back over the last couple months of his administration, he named 8 cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and 6 of those are in Mexico. I think the other 2 are in Venezuela. You and I were in Afghanistan with Special Operations Forces, and their ordinary specialization was South America. Most had worked in Colombia in some way or other. And so I assume many of these guys had been kind of dreaming about cartel-related operations for years. So to get us started, I'm wondering, what was the chit-chat about this Mexico invasion stuff? What was it like among the operations veterans that you were in touch with around the start of the calendar year, just ahead of Trump's inauguration?
I think the thing I most took away from it was how eager they were to participate. I think they all thought it was a worthy adversary. That it was someone that they did deem as a threat to the United States. And every one of the guys I talked to, even the ones who warned against doing it, said they would readily volunteer to go down south and fight the cartels.
That is kind of interesting, the gung-ho quality. Because what you'd written, if anybody's familiar with your writing in the past, covering, the global war on terror in a number of ways, often via Afghanistan, a lot of, your beginning kind of is going to be pretty familiar to anybody familiar with GWAT. But what you wrote reads like the dreams of a lot of like salivating has-beens searching for relevance after the old wars have ended. But on the other hand, like one source told you that the cartels are often a bunch of like salivating wannabes with cheap gear and like a U.S. action movie fetish type thing. I mean, this sounds like kind of some desperados out in the desert. I mean, both of them, both sides. It seems almost like ripe for comedy, but I guess it would have to be like a pretty bloody comedy. I don't know. What were your thoughts as you were hearing these enthusiastic kind of, oh yeah, let's go, let's chuck a bomb down, blah blah blah, let's find a convoy and shoot the HV team, pull them out, and were you kind of was there a degree to which you were thinking, I've been here before in some way or other?
Oh yeah, no, it's deja vu. I mean, they made a video game out of this, right? The Wildlands video game for Tom Clancy, where a Delta-like team goes down there and mixes it up with a Mexican cartel in Bolivia. I mean, this is the fever dream of commandos, especially guys that prove. I mean, as much as we wring our hands about Iraq and Afghanistan, if you go back and look at what Delta was able to do in Iraq, they were really, really effective against Al Qaeda in Iraq, to the point where McChrystal has a post army career built a little bit on his ability to decentralize operations and small cell operations. Our military likes to do this kind of work. They've done it for a long time in Iraq and Afghanistan to mix results. So it surprised me that they were willing to introduce a new quagmire, but it didn't surprise me that they were eager to do the same operations as they were really good at doing. And just to expand, I mean, the flip side of that is, the guys that are looking at Gaza and looking at Ukraine, these are foreign battlefields at this point. Drone swarms, FPV attacks. This is stuff that, the military wasn't dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan. So in some ways, going down to Mexico or to Venezuela and doing decentralized cartel operations is right in the wheelhouse of a lot of these guys' experience.
Yeah, I think one of them even told you, what you're talking about sounds a whole lot like what we did in Afghanistan for 20 years unsuccessful. That's what the guy sort of,
Right. I mean, but he's right. It was unsuccessful in the end. But it's what I was trying to get to a little bit in this story was the how the sausage making of it, right? Not the policy side. The policy side's a mess, and the policy side's still a mess even now, as you start to see Trump signing this declaration, this directive. You see the military starting to spin up, this industrial killing machine that is the byproduct of 9/11. Everybody's sort of leaning front foot towards this mission. The mechanics of it, the gears of it aren't the hard part. It's okay. So what's this? What's the end state? What are you trying to achieve? And these were always these elusive questions that eluded us in Iraq and Afghanistan. These are the things that slip through your fingers if you're not careful. Which is why I think I'm hoping planners have at least taken that lesson and said, all right, before we start to engage in this kind of slippery slope of kind of operation, what is it that we're trying to achieve in it? What's the end state? What does victory look like? I mean, hell, if you define that and try to hold that firm, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. I wrote that down, that kind of excerpt near the end of the piece where Marine was telling you, if our goal is to kill the cartel, how do you know when you've accomplished the mission? What's the metric that these people are going to use that says, oh yeah, we've achieved a victory? We're not fighting an army, he said. We're fighting poverty.
Yeah.
And boy, I remember that sort of thing, root causes of ISIS discussions, for example. And he said, let's fight desperation. Let's fight hopelessness. Boy, that's not very cool, fighting desperation and fighting hopelessness. It's much cooler to just watch things blow up and like relive Manuel Noriega raid from 1989. That seems like where we're headed with some of this sort of stuff in some way. Operation Just Cause, I think that was called, and I always, as a soldier, found that funny because it felt like it was like just because we're bored. I guess there's a degree to which I have to appreciate the level of galvanization for something like this, right? I guess we kind of have to step back and be like, look, here we are. It might sound like a Noriega thing, but there's a lot of people who want to go out and do this kind of thing to fight the drug lords or whatever, the drug cartels. They've been having a free reign for too long. Had you heard sort of stuff related to that? Like, doggone it, it's been decades. We're just too light on them. It's tough guy stuff. What sort of chit chat you hear along those lines?
I mean, I think every administration has been a little guilty of this post 9/11. I think the Trump administration is guilty of it in this case, in that when your only tool is a hammer, everything's a nail. So they think the easiest way to solve this is to hammer it. Um, yes, it's absolutely that. I think we do the Army and the military in particular a disservice when we think they could solve everything. And this looks like another example of where they think employing military might will change a problem that is as much of a supply and demand problem as anything, right? So I don't know how well coordinated professional raids by top tier special operations units are going to stop people from wanting to do drugs. So I'm
Yeah.
interested. I'm curious to see what this looks like. I'm curious to see if we get sort of what the Trump administration has done in Iran, where they take a swing. Um, I was talking with experts today. It seems unlikely Mexico would do very much but complain. Are we going to see the Mexicans turn around and try to appease the Trump administration by taking out a cartel leader? There's a couple targets, in the ongoing Sinaloa civil war that you could maybe sacrifice. It remains to be seen, but the cartels are interwoven into Mexico, into Mexican culture, and I just don't. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to root them out, which is why I've had indications from a couple sources here that it's not just Mexico we're talking about. And I think that the fact that the designation was more than just Mexican cartels and branches into Venezuela, I think opens up doors to maybe operations not in Mexico, despite what everybody seems to think.
Yeah, it does feel like it could get messy on a couple of levels. I still think about that like botched raid in Venezuela from a former Green Beret or two back in the Trump first term. But I think to this question of Mexico, their president Claudia Sheinbaum on Friday, I was reading what she said. She rejected the use of U.S. troops in Mexico, but she did seem to, as you somewhat wrote about, she did seem to kind of almost not rule out completely everything. It's kind of like there might be a way in which it could conceivably work. I kind of sort of like this. I sort of think about the Pakistan bin Laden situation. Like we knew Pakistan didn't want Americans there, but the Americans went there anyway, got him. And so I wonder how much, Scheinbaum's pushback matters a great deal or, and neither one of us are really going to know, but it does seem like the focus on MS-13 and Venezuela's Maduro makes her point maybe a little less relevant at the moment. And maybe, I don't know exactly, but it does remind me of blowback scenarios, as you kind of mentioned. And I got some people I know who go to Colombia fairly often, as far as I know, for totally legit reasons. But it does remind me, as you kind of pointed out, that like it could be that there might be a rise in kidnappings or even killings of U.S. citizens that results from this kind of thing. Did anybody mention second order effects in your conversations?
I mean, when I did the reporting on the story, both in January and recently, first story I got coming out later this week. Yeah, that seems to be where the most vulnerability is. The most of the experts I talked to say they don't think that the cartels would do cross-border operations because it would only, and make the situation worse. But I think they think that the easier targets are Americans who live in Mexico or abroad. It's unclear to me it seems like an escalation by the cartels, and I'm no expert, but I do think it would be a considerable escalation. It would only probably bring more scrutiny down on them.
Mm-hmm.
I did talk to a guy who tracks cartels and has really good sources down in Mexico with the cartels, and he said that the narcos are paying attention, but they're really right now still focused on their rivals. But they are aware of all the new ISR flights that are going up and down the border, and they're getting tracked everywhere. So I'm curious to see if they just absorb a hit like that, or how they would respond.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if they did respond either in attacks on the U.S. soil or even attacks against Americans abroad, I think would be an escalation that would only bring more more scrutiny down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, part of me was conditioned for like an endless stream of number two leaders getting killed, as we were accustomed to during the global war on terror, with still ISIS and the other terrorist organizations still kind of continuing on without missing much of a beat. Have you read or heard anything interesting about the legalities of potential actions involved? I'm going to guess no, but it's hard for me to know there will be too much, that will be a consequence, given the kind of balance of power in Congress right now and in the Supreme Court. But I'm wondering, did that kind of come up at all?
I did. I spoke to a former JAG officer who was talking a little bit about the legality of it, and the FTO designations were just the beginning. Essentially, the Trump administration is going to have to make an argument that the United States is under attack, the Mexicans are unable to stop it, and that their territory is being used. And then from there, special operations raids, as an example, are proportional. And that seems to be the methodology. He while skeptical, he admitted he could make that argument. So that it seems to be somewhat paved that we'll see kind of an extension of what we've seen from other presidents sort of skirting the war powers and doing operations in Syria and in Libya and some other places. That I think the administration could get around some of those legal restrictions that have been pointed out, but I don't know if they're going to slow anything down.
All right, spinning it forward. Last question. What are you working on more lately with this? You wrote this, 6-7 months ago. You've had enough time to think about it. We've got these new developments. What direction are you leaning more lately?
So I'm doing a quick story with a colleague over at Rolling Stone, just kind of an update, sort of calling around everybody. And then I've got a couple other stories I've been looking at around sort of technological advances by the cartels, as well as I'm just trying to keep my arms around it. It is a daunting subject, to be frank with you, and the learning curve on it is pretty steep. There are so many other good reporters and experts, especially in the OSINT community, that do such a super job of really tracking this. That I find that my job mostly is sort of sheep herding their stuff around and getting it into form and into other platforms. But I think it's an interesting story. I think it'll develop. From our background and working together, that I like to get out in the field as much as possible, but I just don't see a real easy pathway where that's going to be possible on this. So, like everybody else, I'll be sort of monitoring, sort of chattering what I hear.
Yeah, you do remind me, amid that kind of note on the technology and the drones. Maduro, if I'm not mistaken, was still supposedly the first world leader to have an attempted assassination attempt on him using drones in like 2018, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the drones are a real thing, and I think the escalation of these FPV drones coming out of Ukraine. There was a report in I think a French investigative journal about Mexican cartel soldiers going over to Ukraine to learn some tactics. I think that's a real thing, and the sources I talked to. Drone attacks and the prevalence of drones into these small cells is a huge deal and a huge concern for the national security community.
Yeah, it's such a vulnerability with these tiny little objects, and carrying more and more, getting more capable, batteries getting better, right? It's probably going to get more complicated. Good luck with that, Paige, as you begin to work on it and churn it out. Kevin Maurer is a writer from North Carolina whose work focuses on U.S. Special Operations Forces around the world. Kevin, thanks again so much for speaking with me. I appreciate it.
Hi, buddy. Be good. See ya.
Well, that's it for us this episode. Thanks for listening. And until next time.
On the front lines, every decision matters. That's why Intel partnered with EdgeRunner AI to bring AI where and when our troops need it most. In the field, in real time. EdgeRunner's secure, domain-specific language model is optimized to run on Intel-powered devices, and it's built on Intel's 50-year commitment to advanced manufacturing right here on American soil. That's the power of Intel Inside. See what we can build together at intel.com/USAI.